Prince Harry grew up as the royal family's problem child, and honestly, the palace spent years cleaning up mess after mess behind the scenes. People always talk about the cheeky prince image, but when you actually look at the stories that followed Harry for years, it paints a very different picture. We're talking drugs, cheating scandals, fights, leaked photos, military controversy, and a level of protection that most normal people could never even dream of getting. And the craziest part? Every single time something exploded publicly, somehow Harry walked away untouched while the palace machine worked overtime to save his image. The thing people forget is that Harry wasn't just some rebellious teenager sneaking around once or twice. According to former staff, reporters, royal insiders, and even stories that later came out in his own book Spare, this behavior followed him for years. And apparently everybody around him knew it. Palace aides allegedly described him as completely out of control as a teenager. There were stories about him kicking staff, throwing tantrums, drinking underage constantly, and using drugs way earlier than the public realized. But nobody wanted to confront him because there was always that emotional shield hanging over everything: Princess Diana's death. And look, nobody is denying that losing his mother was tragic. Of course it was. But what's interesting is how often that tragedy became the excuse for absolutely everything Harry did afterward. Staff members reportedly felt like they couldn't discipline him. The media softened stories. The palace constantly shifted attention away from his behavior and onto sympathy for him. Meanwhile, Prince William lost the same mother, but somehow the two brothers went down completely different paths. One of the first huge scandals happened when Harry was only 16. That's when reports came out that he was smoking marijuana, drinking underage in pubs near Highgrove, and allegedly experimenting with harder drugs too. At the time, the public story was basically, oh, it was just youthful experimentation. But according to multiple royal commentators, people around Harry already believed the situation was way more serious than the palace admitted publicly. And this is where things start getting really interesting, because Harry never really faced consequences. Think about that. If an average teenager got caught doing drugs repeatedly, drinking illegally, getting into trouble publicly, there would probably be police involvement, school punishment, rehab, something. With Harry, Prince Charles reportedly took him to visit a rehab center for one single day. That was basically presented as the solution. Then came Eton College. And honestly, the scandal gets overlooked way too much. Harry was accused of cheating on coursework, and one of his teachers secretly recorded conversations because she felt the whole thing was being covered up. According to reports, Harry admitted he barely did the work himself and had major assistance. Now, normally, something like that could completely destroy a student's academic credibility, especially at a school like Eton. But instead of the conversation becoming, "Did Harry cheat?" the palace and media attention shifted toward attacking the teacher for recording him. That's the pattern you start noticing with Harry's scandals. The focus somehow always moves away from Harry himself. And then came the Nazi uniform scandal in 2005. Honestly, even today, people still remember those photos because they were shocking. Harry showed up to a costume party wearing a Nazi outfit with the swastika armband and everything. The backlash was huge internationally, and suddenly, the royal family had another PR nightmare on their hands. At that point, Harry already had the drugs controversy, the cheating allegations, the partying reputation, and now this. And somehow, right after all of that chaos, Harry still gets pushed toward the military. That's where a lot of critics started asking serious questions, because there were already concerns about whether Harry was even academically qualified. Reports later claimed he struggled badly with entrance exams and allegedly needed heavy assistance to finally pass. But despite all the scandals surrounding him, the palace reportedly pushed hard to make sure Harry got into Sandhurst anyway. Because at that point, the military wasn't just about Harry serving his country. It became image repair. Once Harry entered the military, the palace suddenly had the perfect new storyline. Forget the partying prince, forget the drugs, the cheating accusations, the Nazi costume. Now the headlines became all about Hero Harry. And honestly, you could almost see the PR strategy happening in real time. The military image worked incredibly well for him at first. People love redemption stories, especially in Britain. The idea that Harry had finally found discipline and purpose completely changed public perception. Suddenly, he wasn't the reckless royal anymore. He was the prince serving alongside soldiers in Afghanistan. The palace knew exactly how powerful that image would be. But behind the scenes, the controversies apparently never stopped. One story that keeps coming up involves Harry allegedly struggling massively with the academic side of military training. Even Harry himself admitted in interviews that studying and exams were not exactly his strengths. He literally joked about not expecting to deal with maths and academics anymore after school, which honestly is wild considering he was training to become an Apache helicopter pilot. That's not exactly something you can just wing. And here's where critics really started questioning things. Harry completed parts of the helicopter training program, but there's long been debate about whether he fully qualified the way the public believed. Royal watchers even point to speeches from Queen Elizabeth herself, where she listed royal family members who had earned their wings, and Harry's name noticeably wasn't included. A lot of people took that as confirmation that Harry never fully passed the final requirements. But even with all of that, the palace kept pushing the hero narrative hard. Then another scandal exploded in 2007, when photos surfaced showing Harry partying heavily in Namibia. The public explanation at the time focused on snorting vodka, which already sounded bizarre enough. But critics and gossip commentators immediately started questioning whether it was actually something much worse. The leaked pictures caused chaos because Harry was still actively serving in the military at the time. And once again, the reaction wasn't really centered on Harry's behavior itself. The outrage became about who leaked the photos. That happened constantly with Harry scandals. Instead of asking, why is this happening again, the attention shifted toward the press being invasive or unfair. But according to former military voices and commentators, there were already concerns inside the army about Harry's alleged drug use. Some critics even claimed Harry avoided random military drug testing entirely. And if that's true, people were obviously going to ask questions, because ordinary soldiers don't exactly get special treatment like that. What's crazy is how often the timing worked in Harry's favor. Every time bad press started building around him, suddenly a new positive image appeared. After the Namibia controversy and drug rumors, Afghanistan deployment headlines took over the media. Instantly, the conversation changed again. Now everybody was talking about bravery, service, sacrifice, and Harry risking his life overseas. And look, to be fair, serving in Afghanistan absolutely carried real danger. Nobody can deny that. But critics argue the palace also understood how useful that deployment was for rebuilding Harry's reputation publicly. Then things got even messier, around 2011 and 2012. This is where stories started surfacing about Harry partying in Switzerland during ski trips, hanging around much younger women, and allegedly getting involved in situations that nearly became massive scandals for the royal family. One particular story involved a young woman reportedly ending up hospitalized after a night involving Harry and heavy partying. Rumors exploded everywhere afterward, especially because people claimed palace lawyers and aides stepped in incredibly fast to contain the situation. And honestly, this is where public opinion on Harry really started splitting hard. Some people still saw him as the fun, rebellious prince just enjoying life, but others started looking at the overall pattern. Drugs, fights, alleged cheating, constant partying, scandals getting buried, PR image resets every few years, military hero headlines conveniently arriving at the perfect time. At some point, people stopped seeing isolated mistakes and started seeing a cycle. What makes the whole thing even stranger is how Harry later reinvented himself completely after leaving the royal family. Suddenly, he positioned himself as someone exposing palace manipulation and media cruelty. But critics immediately pointed out something uncomfortable. For years, Harry may have actually benefited from the very system he now attacks publicly. Because, according to royal insiders, palace PR spent decades protecting him. And without that protection, a lot of people believe Harry's life could have looked very, very different. By the time Harry left the military, the palace had basically spent over a decade managing crisis after crisis around him. And honestly, once you line everything up together, you start understanding why so many royal critics say Harry was protected far more than the public ever realized. Because think about it. Most celebrities would have been destroyed by even one of these scandals. A Nazi uniform, drug accusations, alleged cheating at school, constant partying while serving in the military, leaked photos from wild nights overseas, that alone could ruin careers permanently. But with Harry, the image somehow always bounced back. And that's where people started connecting organizations like Centabale and later Invictus to image management too. Now, before anyone twists this, charities themselves can absolutely do good work. Nobody's denying that. But critics argue the timing around these projects mattered a lot. Centabale appeared right when Harry desperately needed softer headlines, after years of bad press. Suddenly, the public focus shifted toward Harry helping vulnerable children in Lesotho, honoring Princess Diana's legacy, and becoming this compassionate humanitarian figure. The palace understood exactly how emotional those Diana comparisons were going to hit people. And honestly, it worked. People stopped talking about the cheating scandal, the Nazi costume faded from headlines, the drug stories cooled off. Instead, the public got emotional photos of Harry hugging sick children and talking about carrying on his mother's mission. That image became incredibly powerful for him. Then, later came Invictus. And this is where things get complicated because Invictus genuinely became meaningful for many veterans. But critics still argue it also helped rebuild Harry's personal image after military controversies and palace frustrations behind the scenes. Suddenly, Harry wasn't the reckless prince anymore. He was the wounded soldier advocate, the prince who found purpose, the man carrying emotional trauma while helping others heal theirs. The palace basically turned Harry's weakness into sympathy over and over again. What's fascinating now is watching Harry publicly attack the institution that protected him for so many years. That's why some royal commentators get so frustrated with him. They believe the same palace Harry now calls toxic is the exact reason he avoided serious consequences for decades. Because, let's be real here, Harry himself admitted to using drugs in spare. He openly talked about cocaine, marijuana, psychedelic drugs, partying, and reckless behavior. And that's coming directly from Harry, not tabloids. So when critics revisit older stories now, suddenly they don't sound so unbelievable anymore. Then you add the constant victim narrative Harry pushes today, and that's where people really divide. Some genuinely sympathize with him and believe he was emotionally damaged by royal life. Others look at the pattern and think Harry learned very early that being Princess Diana's son protected him from accountability. And honestly, both things can probably be true at the same time. You can absolutely suffer trauma and still make terrible decisions. But what critics can't stand is the idea that Harry presents himself publicly as someone crushed by privilege when his privilege may have saved him repeatedly. Because without royal protection, what happens to someone caught with repeated drug allegations? What happens to someone accused of cheating academically? What happens to a public figure photographed in a Nazi uniform? What happens to soldiers facing serious accusations while serving? Most people don't get image rehabilitation campaigns waiting for them. That's why this conversation around Harry has become so intense in recent years, especially after the Oprah interview, Spare, Netflix documentaries, and all the attacks on the royal family. The more Harry talks publicly, the more people start revisiting his past. And the more they revisit it, the more they question how much was hidden from the public for years. What really stands out is the cycle itself. Harry gets into trouble, palace steps in, new hero narrative appears, public sympathy returns. Then another scandal happens. Repeat. And eventually, according to critics, Harry became so used to protection that when the palace finally stopped fixing everything for him after Meghan entered the picture, he completely lost control. That's why some royal watchers believe Harry's anger toward the monarchy isn't just about trauma or media treatment. They think he's furious because the institution that once shielded him no longer does. At the end of the day, Harry remains one of the most complicated royals the family has ever produced. Some people still see the wounded little boy behind Diana's coffin. Others see a deeply privileged man who spent years escaping accountability while blaming everybody else for the fallout. And honestly, the reason people argue about him so much is because both versions of Harry have existed publicly at the exact same time.